July 30th, 1943. 26,000 feet above Nazi Germany. Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth crouches in the tail turret of a B-17 Flying Fortress, his body folded into a space barely larger than a coffin. Through the thin plexiglass bubble, he watches the world fall away. Patchwork fields, winding rivers, the industrial sprawl of Kassel far below. He's 27 years old. Behind him, twin 50 caliber Browning machine guns wait, 565 rounds loaded in each weapon. In front of him, nothing but sky. And somewhere in that sky, death is coming. The intercom crackles. Someone's shouting. Then he sees them, black dots on the horizon, growing larger, faster than seems possible. Messerschmitt 109s, Focke-Wulf 190s. The Luftwaffe's finest killers diving toward the American bomber formation at over 400 miles per hour. Not 5 fighters, not 10 dozens. The combat box formation, that carefully calculated defensive wall of overlapping firepower, begins to shatter. B-17s start falling from the sky, trailing smoke and flame. Men he ate breakfast with this morning are dying, and then the fighters focus on his aircraft, the Tandelio. For the next 3 minutes, Michael Arooth will do something that military historians will argue about for the next 80 years. Something that seems physically impossible, something that will change how air forces around the world think about defensive gunnery. He's about to turn a flying coffin into a fortress. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand the mathematics of death. By the summer of 1943, the U.S. 8th Air Force had a problem, a catastrophic mission-ending problem. Every time American bombers flew deep into Germany, they were being slaughtered. The statistics were brutal. On some missions, casualty rates hit 30%. 30%. That meant if you climbed into a B-17 on Monday morning, there was nearly a 1 in 3 chance you wouldn't be alive by Tuesday. The Army Air Force required crews to complete 25 missions before they could go home. Do the math. The odds were savagely against you. Most airmen didn't think in terms of if they'd be shot down. They thought in terms of when. The B-17 Flying Fortress was supposed to solve this problem. The name itself was propaganda, a promise that these bombers could defend themselves. Boeing had bristled the aircraft with 13 50 caliber machine guns, nose guns, waist guns, ball turret, top turret, and in the back, isolated and alone, the tail gunner. The theory was beautiful. Fly these bombers in tight formation, what they called a combat box, and you'd create an impenetrable wall of defensive fire. Overlapping fields of fire, mutual protection, every approach angle covered by multiple gun positions. But theory and reality were having a brutal divorce over Germany. The Luftwaffe had figured out the B-17's weakness. The nose. Early models had limited forward firepower, maybe 4 guns operated by the bombardier. Everything else pointed sideways or backward. So German fighter pilots stopped attacking from behind. They came from the front, head-on attacks, screaming toward American bombers at combined closing speeds of over 500 miles per hour. At those speeds, bomber gunners had maybe 2 seconds to acquire the target, lead it properly, and fire. 2 seconds before a Messerschmitt 109 armed with 20mm cannons and machine guns would rip through the B-17's flight deck, killing pilots, navigator, and bombardier in a single devastating pass. The Germans called this tactic attacking through the porcupine's soft nose. American bomber crews had a different name for it. They called it murder. Between January and August 1943, the 8th Air Force lost over 200 B-17s and B-24 Liberators to these frontal assaults. That's over 2,000 men dead, captured, or missing. The bomber generals were desperate. They tried everything. Tighter formations, different altitudes, varying the routes. Nothing worked. The Luftwaffe was winning, and bomber gunners, they were dying faster than everyone else. The life expectancy of a tail gunner was measured in weeks. 6 to 8 weeks on average. Some sources put it lower. The tail position combined every nightmare of aerial combat into one cramped, freezing, isolated hell. You knelt or sat on a bicycle-style seat, hunched forward, staring backward through a plexiglass bubble at 40 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude. Your oxygen line could freeze, your guns could jam, and you were the furthest from the rest of the crew. If the aircraft was hit and going down, you had the longest journey to bail out. Many tail gunners never made it, but the tail gunner had one advantage. One crucial life-saving advantage that no other position possessed: vision. From the tail, you could see the entire sky behind the bomber. You were the early warning system, the sentinel, the last line of defense. When Luftwaffe fighters made their approach, whether from 6 o'clock low or high, you saw them first. You called them out. And if they came too close from behind, you were the man who had to stop them. The problem was, stopping them seemed impossible. The M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun was devastating at close range, effective out to 1,800 meters, firing at 450 to 600 rounds per minute, each bullet heavy enough to punch through engine blocks. But hitting a fighter aircraft in three-dimensional aerial combat required predicting where that aircraft would be. In the fraction of a second, it took your bullets to travel. Lead the target. Adjust for wind. Account for your own aircraft's movement. Factor in the speed and angle of the attacking fighter. Most tail gunners never scored a confirmed kill. The best might get 1 or 2 in their entire combat tour. Getting 3 was extraordinary. Getting 5 made you an unofficial ace. So when the B-17 named Tandelio lifted off from RAF Kimballton on the morning of July 30th, 1943, nobody expected what was about to happen. Nobody expected Michael Arooth. Michael Louis Aruth wasn't supposed to be a hero. He enlisted in Springfield, Massachusetts on August 25th, 1942. 27 years old, 3 years of high school education, single. He'd been working a semi-skilled job when the war came. Nothing in his background suggested he'd become the most lethal bomber gunner in Air Force history. But something about Aruth was different. Maybe it was his age. He was older than most gunners, more mature, steadier under pressure. Maybe it was natural talent. Maybe it was simply that when chaos erupted at 26,000 feet, when most men froze or panicked, Michael Arooth got calm. He trained as a tail gunner and was assigned to the 527th Bombardment Squadron, 379th Bomb Group, one of the units making up the legendary 8th Air Force operating out of England. The 379th was based at Kimballton, a muddy airfield in Cambridgeshire that would eventually fly more combat sorties than any other bomb group in the entire war. By July 1943, Aruth had flown several missions. He'd seen bombers explode. He'd seen men die. He'd fired his guns at German fighters and had no idea if he'd hit anything. That was the cruel reality of bomber gunnery. In the chaos of combat, with multiple aircraft firing at the same targets, you almost never knew if your bullets found their mark. But his crew was starting to notice something. When fighters attacked, Aruth didn't waste ammunition spraying wildly. He waited, he tracked. He led his targets with unnatural precision, and his gun spoke in short, controlled bursts, exactly as the training manuals recommended, but almost nobody actually did in combat. The Tandelio was a B-17F. Serial number 42-29896. Like many bombers, it carried nose art, a glamorous woman, Hollywood style. The name came from a 1942 movie. The aircraft had been delivered to the 379th in May 1943, just 2 months before that fateful July mission. On July 30th, the target was the Fieseler Aircraft Works in Kassel, Germany, factories producing engines and components for the Luftwaffe. It was a deep penetration mission, hundreds of miles into German territory. No fighter escort. The P-47 Thunderbolts couldn't fly that far yet. The bombers would be alone. 23 B-17s from the 379th Bomb Group took off that morning. The Tandelio carried a standard 10-man crew, pilot, co-pilot, navigator Elmer Bendener, bombardier, flight engineer and top turret gunner, radio operator, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, and in the tail, Michael Arooth. They climbed to altitude and formed up in the combat box, that 3-dimensional chess formation designed to maximize defensive fire. Bombers stacked high and low, staggered left and right, creating overlapping fields of fire. In theory, attacking fighters would face a wall of .50 caliber death from every direction. They crossed into German airspace. The flak started first. Black puffs of 80-meter anti-aircraft fire, blooming in the formation like deadly flowers. The pilots flew straight and level. You had to for the bomb run, while shrapnel ripped through aluminum skin. 1 B-17 took a direct hit and simply disintegrated. 19 men gone in an instant. Then the fighters came. Navigator Elmer Bendener would later write about what happened next. The Tandelio was being knocked about the sky, he recorded, climbing, diving, and making corkscrew patterns in a crazy choreography designed to unsettle the fighters, who were pressing in from all sides. Dozens of German fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, the Luftwaffe's frontline killers. They came in waves, attacking from multiple angles simultaneously, trying to overwhelm the bombers' defensive fire. The combat box began to fall apart. When bombers broke formation, separated from the mutual protection of the group, they became easy prey. A 1943 Army study would later show that about half of all B-17s lost in combat had left formation. Staying in the box was life. Breaking away was death. But the Tandelio couldn't stay in formation. Enemy fire had damaged the aircraft. The pilots were fighting just to keep it airborne, throwing the bomber into violent evasive maneuvers. The Luftwaffe smelled blood. In the waist of the aircraft, both gunners were hit. Wounded or dead, accounts vary. The ball turret gunner passed out briefly from oxygen deprivation. The oxygen system was damaged, lines severed by enemy fire. At 26,000 feet, that was a death sentence. Without oxygen, you had maybe 30 seconds of useful consciousness before your brain shut down. The aircraft was dying, and the fighters knew it. That's when they made their mistake. They attacked from behind. Michael Arooth had been calling out fighters over the intercom the entire battle. 6 o'clock high. 5 o'clock low. But now he stopped talking. Now he had work to do. The first Messerschmitt came in from directly astern, the classic 6 o'clock position, probably thinking the tail gunner was dead or incapacitated like the waist gunners. Aruth let him close. 1,000 yards, 800 yards, 600 yards. At 400 yards, he opened fire. The 50 calibers hammered, twin streams of tracers reaching out. The Bf-109 flew into that steel rain. Aruth saw pieces fly off the fighter, cowling, canopy fragments, debris. The German aircraft rolled left, trailing smoke, and fell away, one down. But there was no time to watch it fall. Another fighter was already positioning for an attack. Aruth swung his guns, tracking the target, leading it. The Luftwaffe pilots were good. They didn't fly straight. They jinked, rolled, changed angles of attack. But Aruth's guns followed them like they were connected by wire. Second burst. Another Bf-109 reeled away, wing shredded, flames licking from the engine cowling. 2 down. The intercom was chaos, everyone shouting, calling out targets. But Aruth was in the zone. That place where time seems to slow, where your hands move without conscious thought, where training and instinct merge into something beyond both. A Focke-Wulf 190 came from below and behind, climbing toward the bomber's belly. Aruth depressed his guns to the limit of their travel and fired a long burst. The FW-190's engine exploded. The fighter snap-rolled and went into a death spiral, 3 down. But now Aruth had a problem. The oxygen line in the tail had been severed. In the thin air at altitude, oxygen deprivation begins immediately. Vision narrows. Thinking slows. Your fingers stop working. In 60 seconds, you're unconscious. In 3 minutes, you're dead. Aruth kept firing. Fourth fighter. A Bf-109 attacking from high 7 o'clock. Aruth tracked it, let it, fired. The canopy shattered. The fighter peeled off violently, out of control. 4 down. His vision was blurring now. The edges of his sight going dark. Hypoxia, oxygen starvation. His hands felt distant, disconnected, but the triggers were under his thumbs and his thumbs still worked. 5th fighter, 6th. The details blur here. Even Aruth's own accounts were hazy. But the other crew members saw it. They watched tracer rounds from the tail reach out again and again. They watched German fighters break off, smoking, burning, falling. And then, impossibly, one of Aruth's guns jammed. At this altitude, guns jam constantly. The cold makes the oil sluggish. Spent casings don't eject properly. The belts feed wrong? It's expected. What's not expected is fixing it while under attack, while oxygen deprived, while the aircraft bucks and rolls around you. Aruth cleared the jam. How he probably didn't remember. Training takes over. Muscle memory. You pull the bolt, clear the feed, slam it home. 5 seconds. 10. The gun fired again. 7th fighter. By now, the German fighters were breaking off. They'd seen enough. In 3 minutes of sustained combat, the tail gunner of the Tandelio had shot down 7 confirmed fighters. 7. In 3 minutes. But Aruth wasn't done. As the Tandelio limped away from the target area, scattered from the main formation and vulnerable, more fighters probed the bomber's defenses. Aruth's gun spoke again. And again. By the time the Tandelio crossed back into friendly airspace, Michael Arooth had shot down a total of 10 enemy aircraft in a single mission. 10 confirmed kills. Some accounts say more. Probables and damaged aircraft that didn't go down where crew members could see them. 10 fighters. One mission. It was the single greatest individual defensive gunnery performance in the history of aerial warfare. When the Tandelio finally landed back at Kimballton, the ground crews couldn't believe it. The aircraft was shot full of holes. The oxygen system was destroyed. The waist guns were blood-splattered. By all rights, this bomber and her crew should have been blown out of the sky over Kassel, but they weren't, because one man in the tail had turned the tide. The immediate aftermath of the July 30th mission revealed something even more incredible. When the ground crews inspected the Tandelio's fuel tanks, they found 11 20mm cannon shells. 11. These were the primary weapons of German fighters, explosive rounds designed to blow chunks out of bombers. Each shell carried enough explosive to tear a hole the size of a dinner plate in aircraft aluminum. But these shells hadn't exploded. They'd punched through the fuel tanks and lodged there unexploded. The crew examined them more closely. The shells were empty. No explosives. All but one had been sabotaged. The powder charges removed, the explosive fillings extracted. And inside one shell casing they found a small piece of paper with a message written in Czech. "This is all we can do for you now." Somewhere in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia, a prisoner, probably a slave laborer forced to work in a munitions factory, had sabotaged these weapons, had risked execution to give unknown American airmen a chance at survival. The Tandelio had been saved twice that day, once by Michael Arooth's guns and once by a nameless Czech prisoner's defiance. But the military wanted to focus on what they could measure, what they could prove, what they could replicate. The Distinguished Service Cross is America's second highest military decoration, awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. On August 30th, 1943, exactly 1 month after the Kassel mission, Michael Arooth received it. His citation reads, "The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Distinguished Service Cross to Staff Sergeant Michael Arooth, United States Army Air Forces, for extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy while serving as tail gunner in a B-17 heavy bomber of the 527th Bombardment Squadron, 379th Bombardment Group, H, 8th Air Force, while participating in a bombing mission on 30 July 1943 against enemy ground targets in Germany. On that date, Staff Sergeant Arooth shot down 3 enemy airplanes, and even though the airplane's oxygen line was broken, one gun was jammed and he was severely wounded, he remained at his post, repaired his gun, resumed fire, and destroyed the 4th plane. Wait, the citation says 3 enemy airplanes and mentions a 4th, but the crew reported 10. What happened? This is where the story gets complicated, where heroism meets bureaucracy, where eyewitness accounts collide with official policy. The Army Air Force had a policy. Bomber gunners didn't receive individual credit for kills. The reasoning was both practical and political. In a combat box formation, multiple gunners might be firing at the same fighter simultaneously. How do you determine whose bullets actually brought it down? You can't. So the official policy was to credit kills to the aircraft or the crew, not to individuals. But Michael Arooth's case was different. His kills happened when the Tandelio was separated from the formation. No other aircraft was in position to fire at those fighters. The other crew members all confirmed it. The tail gunner's tracers, the tail gunner's targets, the tail gunner's kills. Yet official recognition was limited. The citation mentioned only 3 confirmed and 1 more probable, but Aruth's service record, the unofficial count that the crew maintained, listed 17 enemy aircraft destroyed over his combat tour. 17, 3, times the kills needed for ace status. If he'd been a fighter pilot with that record, his name would be in every history book. There'd be documentaries, movies, memorial statues, but he was a gunner, an enlisted man. His heroism didn't fit the narrative the Army wanted to tell. Still, word spread. Other bomber crews heard about the tail gunner who'd shot down 10 fighters in one mission. Gunnery instructors used his technique as a teaching example. Intelligence officers studied the engagement, trying to understand how one man had achieved what seemed mathematically impossible. The answer, they decided, came down to 4 factors. First, patience. Aruth didn't spray bullets wildly. He waited for killing range, 400 to 600 yards, where accuracy was possible, but the closing speed still gave him time for multiple bursts. Second, precision. His burst discipline was textbook perfect. 3 to 5 second bursts just as the manual specified, long enough to hit but short enough to prevent barrel overheat and jam. Third, geometry. Aruth understood lead angles intuitively. Where most gunners struggled to predict where a maneuvering target would be, he seemed to see it naturally, adjusting his aim point by instinct. Fourth, and most important, he stayed conscious. While hypoxic, while wounded, while one gun jammed and the aircraft bucked around him, he remained functional. That alone separated him from almost every other gunner who faced similar circumstances. The Tandelio would fly again after July 30th. But her luck, like that of so many bombers, eventually ran out. On September 6, 1943, just over a month after Aruth's heroic mission, the Tandelio was shot down over Stuttgart during a raid on ball-bearing factories. The aircraft ditched in the English Channel. All 10 crew members survived the ditching and were rescued. Michael Arooth flew more missions after that on different aircraft. By the end of his combat tour, his unofficial tally stood at 17 confirmed kills and at least a dozen probables, the highest confirmed score for any bomber gunner in American military history. When the war ended, he came home. He married. He lived quietly. He rarely talked about the war. In 1958, the Army selected him as an honorary pallbearer for the ceremony, establishing the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. Recognition that the military hadn't forgotten what he'd done, even if the wider public had. He died in February 1990 at the age of 70. Representative Richard Neal of Massachusetts read a tribute to him into the congressional record. But there's no major memorial. No big monument. Ask most people about bomber aces from World War II and they'll draw a blank. Ask them about fighter aces and they'll name a dozen. The story of Michael Arooth and the Tandelio raises an uncomfortable question. How many heroes did we forget? The Army Air Force officially credited bomber gunners with shooting down 6,259 enemy aircraft during World War II, with another 1,836 probables and over 3,000 damaged. That's more than 8,000 German and Japanese fighters removed from the sky by men firing from cramped, freezing exposed positions in bombers that were never designed to dogfight. But we don't know their names. Official policy prevented them from receiving individual credit. They were crew members, team players, interchangeable parts in the great machine of strategic bombing, except they weren't interchangeable. Michael Arooth proved that. So did Donald Crossley, a B-17 tail gunner with 12 confirmed kills, and Thomas Dye, a ball turret gunner with 8, and Benjamin Warner, a waist gunner who shot down 7 German fighters in a single mission on July 5, 1943. Just 25 days before Aruth's record-breaking performance. These men existed. These achievements happened, but they don't fit our mythology of aerial combat. We want fighter pilots. We want lone wolves in sleek aircraft, dancing through the sky in single combat. We want the image burned into culture by Top Gun and the Battle of Britain. Individual heroism, identifiable valor, clean attribution of cause and effect. But bomber gunners fought a different kind of air war. They fought from lumbering targets, defending rather than attacking, working as part of a crew rather than solo. Their heroism was collective, their victories shared. The official policy reflected this reality. Yet occasionally, someone like Michael Arooth emerged, someone whose performance was so extraordinary, so clearly individual, that it couldn't be buried in collective credit. 10 fighters in one mission, 17 over a combat tour. These numbers rewrote what military planners thought was possible for defensive gunnery. The legacy shows up in unexpected places. After Arooth's performance, the Army intensified gunnery training. They studied his technique, his discipline, his patience. They taught it to the next generation of gunners. Post-mission intelligence reports started paying more attention to individual gunner performance, looking for other Arooths, trying to replicate his success. The Navy took notice, too. When they designed gun positions for the B-29 Superfortress, the next generation of heavy bomber, they studied engagements like Aruth's. They installed better oxygen systems. They improved the tailgunner position. They added gun cameras to track individual performance. By 1944, bomber defensive gunnery had improved dramatically. Luftwaffe pilots reported that attacking American bomber formations had become far more dangerous. Survival rates for bomber crews increased. Some of that was better fighter escorts. Some was improved tactics. But some was simply that the gunners had gotten better. Michael Arooth's 3 minutes over Kassel had rippled forward. Today, the age of bomber gunners is over. Modern aircraft use missiles, electronic warfare, stealth. No human being sits in a turret with machine guns, defending their aircraft through skill and courage. But the lesson remains. In desperate circumstances, a single person with training, discipline, and courage can change the outcome, can turn certain death into survival, can take the worst odds and flip them, can turn 3 minutes of hell into a masterpiece of defensive warfare. Michael Arooth didn't change the course of World War II. The Allies would have won without him. But he changed the odds for his crew. For the crews who learned from his example, for every gunner who heard his story and thought, if he could do that, maybe I can survive this. That's the real legacy. Not the medals, not the records, but the hope, the proof that even in a sky full of death, one person could make a difference.